The Middle East has a new story to tell, and this is From MENA to the World. And I'm your host, Amir Farha. I've been investing in startups since 2005. More recently, I co-founded Beko Capital, and now Co2 Ventures, a seed-stage VC focused on investing in incredible founders in the Middle East at the earliest stages of their journeys. I've been involved in backing extraordinary companies founded by amazing people. And over the years of investing, I've found that I love understanding the human side to entrepreneurship. I love hearing the stories from people that faced and surmounted huge challenges. And I love championing underdogs who are against the odds of success. For the longest time, the MENA region has been misunderstood. Today, we are creating a new narrative, a new voice that harnesses our strengths and is a driver of our future. The Middle East has a new story to tell, and this is From MENA to the World. So today we're lucky to have Ola Doudin with us. She's the founder of BitOasis, and this is probably, I really enjoyed recording this episode. Ola talks about her childhood and her rebellious side, as well as like going and navigating in the crypto world far earlier than anybody, coming close to near death a few times and making it out now by being the first regulated exchange. And she just got some really amazing insights for founders and talks about the persistence that you need to really go through this, especially the delusional persistence, which is something that hopefully most of the founders watching have and continue to do some really exciting things. So we hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks, Hala, for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about yourself, but in a hopefully a nice and casual way. So, I always ask people this question as a starting point because I feel like it's like an introspective one. So, like, if you had to describe yourself to anyone or your audience or peers, or friends, how do you describe yourself? Like, what words would you use or sentences?
Ooh, okay, interesting question. Well, first, I'm happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me over for the podcast show. How would I describe myself? That's an interesting one because usually, like, people say, "Oh, how would your friends describe you?" But I think with the question of how you describe yourself when like someone is like so self-critical, it becomes like even more of a challenging question to
interesting,
answer.
yeah.
Okay, so I can start with like, recently what I've been more kind of realizing about myself and like what I've become more self-aware of like what defines, me as a person and hence how I describe myself. I think someone who enjoys a challenge, someone who is really likes to kind of dive deep into things, so enjoys, which I think it's a product of enjoying a challenge. And then I think someone who's also like caring and sharing, although it sounds like a cliche, but like yeah, like enjoys that human element of things, like being social and like fostering relationships and reciprocating. So yes, I think those are the three things that when I like were self-reflecting, almost to an extent it was like very self-critical, but like let's kind of go back into more like a balanced approach. I would say is like those three things that I feel like as a human probably makes up like the majority of who I am as a character. So yeah.
Wow, that's a really interesting set of answers. So I guess, so I also want to take a look on the self-critical side because I think everyone is their own biggest critic, right? Like I do that a lot to myself. So I'm always curious about everyone else's life journeys and how they think about it because it can be limiting, but it's also like empowering if you're able to leverage those things. So let's leave that, or maybe you can talk about the self-critical part. Like, what do you think your I guess limiting beliefs or whatever, just anything that comes to mind when you think about that.
I always believe that what makes someone successful is the same trait that also it almost becomes like their enemy, because I think what makes someone successful almost always it's like an extreme form of a trait that depending how you like employ it in a situation, it either works to your advantage or you're kind of like shooting yourself in the foot. And I feel like those are the same things that like if you take like the founder of Uber, like to some extent, how aggressive he was, like kind of made him successful. But at the end of the day, it actually what led to his demise. And I see like in different examples where, that same trait that made you successful is probably the same trait that if you're not very aware of it, will end up kind of, putting you down.
Man, that is totally buy into that. Okay, so what is your trait?
I think it's really that like being conscious and self-critical, self-aware. I think is like the balanced way of saying it, and then the extreme of that is being self-critical, right?
Yeah.
Like to an extent where like it almost becomes
The worst
like
enemy.
handicap in some sense. I think there's like a number of traits, but like the self-critical one is something that I think to a large extent is a good one, even at an extreme, because then that's where you learn and reiterate and relearn and all of that. But then if it gets to a stage where it's not actually producing action, then that's where you're like, okay, you need to stop and assess how you're like really looking like at yourself. So like in some ways you want to use it as a tool to drive more like action and improvement versus kind of putting you down and affecting your self-esteem. And I think it all kind of comes down to like how I was like raised, and my mom is like a super perfectionist, and
We're gonna go into that.
yeah. So
But I think it's awareness. Like it sounds like you're quite aware, which I think is one of the best qualities for any founder and even an investor, to be honest. Self-awareness is key. So when you look at your childhood and you were just saying about your mom, I mean, I always think that a lot of the things that you described, your patterns or your let's say beliefs systems are a function of like your conditioning and your upbringing and stuff. So if you don't mind telling me more about that, what it was like, that would be awesome.
I have like different memories of how my childhood was, and to some extent, like in some situations I recall some things, and other situations I like recall like the other kind of bad stuff. But no, in total, I think when like I hit 30, and then well now I'm like close to 33. But like in the last couple of years, I really almost kind of got into a situation where like I'm doing a 360 assessment of myself, and eventually you end up digging deeper into your childhood, right? In your upbringing to really understand why are some of the things I'm doing right now, I'm like doing it this way. And it's almost like you said 100%, it's the conditioning, right? That
Yeah.
you were like kind of raised with and all of that. And a lot of it is nurture, it's not nature actually. A lot of these things I'm actually very thankful of, like my mom and my dad, like high ethics, right? Like also like great work ethic is like if you're going to do something, do it very well, and all of that. But also like the perfectionism part of things, which also becomes very taxing on someone. And it's almost like there was always like a high standard, right? Like the way you eat and the way you dress and the way you present yourself, but then also like your grades and how you're performing, how you're scoring, and then compared to like I don't know, your peers and your sisters and your cousins. And I think it's something like Middle Eastern in the sense like to some extent your self-worth is really tied to your accomplishments and your grades, and which is a great thing because your parents always want you to succeed. But for some reason I think it was me versus my other sisters. So we're like actually five sisters, and I'm like the middle child. And I think my parents probably early on realized, okay, we've got like a smart kid here among like the five sisters. Not like trying to say like I'm smarter than any of that, but I think like I enjoyed challenges, and part of the challenge was like I really always wanted to like score and make sure I have good grades, and then be part of like the school activities and like the art clubs and the math clubs. And I think my parents got so excited about this to an extent like they kept kind of pushing me even more. And to an extent like if I get an A and it's not an A plus, is like why is it not an A plus? Or do you know like it was constantly that. And I think that ultimately builds that conditioning where you know it's almost like what you do is not good enough, you always have to be seeking like something better. It almost kind of gets tied to who you are as a person. You no longer differentiate between who you are professionally, or who you are, I don't know, like say academically, and then who you are as a person. And I think it's just only recently that I started kind of realizing that like no, you're actually different people, you're not one person. And that's like your metric, right? That's what I was actually trying to do, is like kind of slice up my life and add kind of like KPIs to it in a sense where like let's be methodical about this.
Wow.
But then what I realized is like you're almost just like focusing on one area, because it's almost like that was the environment that you were part of or raised or kind of been conditioned to
Yeah.
kind of optimize for. And then everything else, I guess my parents just kind of figured out, oh, like as a normal person, you're just going to go out and then, like, I don't know, become a social person and then have just a normal life. But actually, I think what I realized is like almost every part of yourself needs, to some extent, depending what you're prioritizing, a lot of work to like, be a good person or be a good partner or be like, I don't know, a good CEO or a good founder. It takes like a lot of a lot of work. But also what's really good is that if you work on yourself in one area, it almost like trickles down to everything else. There's that saying, it's like the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And I believe that, because if you're a good person work wise and like you have a high work ethic, it almost becomes, I mean, obviously there's different examples, on that, but I think it all starts with you being a good human. And if you work on that foundation, almost everything else you do will get impacted in a good way. So I always try to kind of, use that rule where what is like the one thing or like two things that if I improve on, it's almost like high leverage, right? You want to kind of find the things that if you improve on them, there's
Has a
high
massive,
leverage and it
yeah.
affects everything else in your life. So it almost like try to get into that exercise, like fundamentally on a human level, what are like the two or three things I should work on right now that are high leverage areas, and then it'll like make me improve or make me better at like three, four other things. Um,
That's amazing.
so
Sorry, I'm gonna cut you off because I think leverage
yeah,
is an amazing concept that I only realized about it, how you can really use it
yeah,
today in life, and I think we are lucky in that our world, in the sense of technology, is probably the most impactful in terms of leverage you can use to really create impact. But going back a second, because I'm also a middle of three boys.
oh wow,
And so this is not the first time I bring this up because it seems as though a lot of founders are middle kids. Well,
really?
so far I've been speaking to a couple that are from, the ecosystem. And I always am curious, like the way I look at it, not to go deep onto the subject, but it's like you're always in comparison with everything, right? You're
Yeah,
like the benchmark, and you generally don't, you're never going to be as good as
no,
in certain things with your elder sisters. And you'll be better than your younger ones, maybe, or in my case, my younger brother, because he's 6 years younger. So, but that reference point would make you feel like you're never good enough, right?
yeah,
And you always need to push harder. And I think it's your strength, but like you said on the self-critical thing, your biggest weakness, at least me, that's probably I'd say my weakness is I always think I'm not good enough, but it makes me do things that I would never, I'd push myself to the limit to try and solve that problem. So and I feel like I only became aware of that literally when I was also 33, like 5-6 years ago, and that manifested itself into many different patterns that I think were negative, but now moving towards positive, and they have that leverage and impact because when you behave with those positive patterns, it can really, really impact everyone around you. So
yeah.
love that. But I guess before we go there, like because I think there was some insights there, but I mean, I guess growing up, then how did you think about your life choices, or when did you really take control of your life? Because Arab families are generally quite controlling in where they send their kids to school, what to study. And you're an Arab woman, not that, I mean, I think that's a bit more even
Yeah, but
difficult.
culturally,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Like the norm, right?
yeah,
So that's a very good question. And I think I never really realized it, but my dad one time told me you almost started taking your own decisions around like 15 or 16. But I've never actually realized that I was taking my own decisions. But one thing though, that I'm very thankful actually to my mom and my dad, we've had like an atypical upbringing, in the sense like we've never had an authoritarian kind of upbringing, in the sense like my mom and my dad were always our reference points, but they were never there dictating certain rules. Okay, you have to do this. No, you don't have to. Like, and there wasn't like punishment as such. Like, we didn't have that kind of upbringing, but it was always like, all right, this is, that's what's best for you to do. There's always like some form of negotiation. We actually turned out to be like really kind of like, calm, agreeable kind of kids. And we never really had like problems as such. Obviously every kid has their own problems, but we never really, I feel like, strayed away from like the right path, if you want
yeah,
to put it
yeah.
in that way.
You
Um,
weren't too naughty, Annie. You weren't like, do that. Yeah,
exactly.
okay, I get it.
Yeah. But to some extent, we were still like rebellious and stubborn and all of that. Um, but I think like my parents always created that space where you can negotiate, you can be who you are as a person, and you can do your own choices so long as you're not affecting yourself like negatively, or like your I don't know, let's say your future, your career, any of that. So around like the age of 14 or 15, I wanted to change schools because I wasn't so happy with like the level of I thought like my teachers weren't really good. So I went to my mom and my dad and I was like, I want to change schools. I was like, 13 or 14. I can't actually like 100% remember. And then my dad was like, why do you want to change schools? Like all your sisters in this school. And, we think it's pretty good. Like, everyone's doing well. I was like, no, 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 no. Because I was starting my O levels at that point. This is like the
So
IGCSEs.
15, probably 15, yeah.
Probably
14,
15,
yeah,
exactly.
okay.
And then I was like, no, no, I want to change to another school because there's this teacher and everyone is like getting like B's and C's on this subject, but I think they're A students. And my dad was like, okay, so what do you want to do? So I started talking to like other friends in other schools and then did like this whole kind of like research on why I should move to this new school and why it would be better for me because I need to like do like, have straight A's. And then my dad wasn't convinced and then I convinced my mom. And like there were like series of meetings between my mom and my dad and I until like they got convinced. And then I moved to the other school.
Wow, they listened. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, they're actually like, if you build the case, like it's always been like, that Jeff Bezos rule, like disagree but commit. Like my mom and my dad, like it's funny. They have this where like, okay, we don't agree, but it sounds like you have a good case, so let's try it.
Love
And
it.
then I moved to the new school, and then actually a year afterwards, I was kicked out. And the
Wow.
reason I was kicked out, I think I was like the new school that I went to was like super like apolitical, like secular. Like, you're just there studying and like that's it. And then the school I was in before was like a bit more like cultural, and then it allowed like kind of more like, we had debate clubs and it was, I think, more nurturing on like the, human side. And I think like there was some point where like I really pissed off like the school administration because I was like I started like a debate club and like a political club, and then like a lot of kids like it's like I don't want to kind of get into the details of that, but it got to a point where they were like, okay, we can't have this kid causing a lot of issues. And at some point there was like a protest
Wow.
and then the principal, honestly, the principal didn't actually consult the school's committee, but she just decided this is like a kid that's causing us
Go ahead, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, it was causing us a lot of problems, and we need to like send her to a different school. And then I had my file, and then I said like, kind of like dismissed or whatever it is. And then I was homeschooled for 4
Expelled. You're
weeks.
expelled from school.
Expelled
Wow.
from school, exactly. And then I was homeschooled for 4 weeks. And then, week one, my dad was like, look, this is not going to work. We're going to have to move you to a different school. And I was like, no, no, I didn't do anything wrong. I'm going to have to go back to my school. And he's like, no, no, you don't understand. You've got your O levels and you've got your exams at the end of the year. You're going to have to go back to school. And anyway, back and forth. And there was like a big story around it. And like the Minister of Education in Jordan also stepped in and all of that. Anyway, I went back to school after 4 weeks, basically. Like the school administration. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the homeschooling was basically me calling my teacher at the end of every day, asking her what like you've covered in like different subjects. And she was telling me what we've covered. And then I had my books and I just like kind of studied. And then I'll talk to like my other friends and guys, how do you like solve this? And then like I'll meet them after they're finished school and we'll do like mini study groups. Anyway, it was
So
fine.
for someone who got expelled, I mean, you studied hard as well.
Yeah.
So it was like, I guess that's an interesting lesson to have early on. And then what happened with school?
So they realized, they've done a mistake and all of that, and then they brought me back, and like there were several people who also stepped in. It wasn't like a huge scandal or any of that, but I think like people like the committees or whoever on the board in the school didn't realize that the principal just took that decision on her own. I think there were like several other stuff they weren't happy about. So, anyways, they actually like ended up moving her to like I don't know, like a different department, and then they had like a new principal.
Wow.
I don't think it was my case.
Huh? Drama. Okay, let's not go there. Let's not go there. But let's just go back. Let's go back to. Okay, so you go through this journey at high school, kind of rebellious. Actually, got expelled, homeschooled. Pretty interesting sequence of events.
It's like quiet rebellion. That's the thing. Like I was
Ah,
never
quiet
like an
rebellion,
angry
yeah.
child. I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
just
yeah.
like, I'm just doing my own thing. And
Yeah, exactly. But you were different and that kind of stuff.
Probably, yeah.
And so I guess like what are your just quickly if you don't mind sharing, like what do your parents do?
So my dad is a businessman. He's always been like starting, his own businesses with
Oh, so
like
he's an
friends.
entrepreneur.
He's an entrepreneur, exactly. And so his background is he's a pharmacist and optometrist. So he's done like a double major. He studied in Spain and then moved back to the region. And he's got his own story in terms of like different countries that he lived in.
Okay.
And I think partly this is probably why our upbringing also as like females in the Middle East is quite unconventional to some extent.
Yeah.
So my mom did English literature back in Saudi. She worked as a translator for a while, and then when she had us, she just decided to like focus on like family
Yeah,
upbringing.
especially five daughters is a lot.
Yeah, I know. But honestly, in my view, she's like the best like kind of like mother. Like yeah, in my head. So
Amazing.
yeah.
Okay, and so now let's go back to your before university. How did you make your choice around like, what degree to study? What did you study in the end?
I did electronic engineering in Birmingham in the UK.
What was the reason why you decided to go and do electronic engineering?
So I actually wanted to study physics. I like sciences in general, and I was really good at math and physics. So I kind of knew what I was good at. I didn't enjoy like chemistry, biology, all of that. And then I was like, well, I went to my dad and I was like, I want to study abroad. And he was like, no, just do your bachelor's in Jordan and then you'll do your master's. Because I was like 17 at that point. I was really young. And this whole kind of school thing happened like a couple of years back. And then my dad was like, all right, this is like still like a very immature kid. We can't like send her
Yeah.
go study internationally. And then I was like, no, but I want to study like abroad. And then by the way, there was this whole kind of negotiation as well that went into that. And then the deal was if I would go study abroad, it has to be engineering. Like my dad is not gonna send me to study abroad to do like physics.
Okay.
But the deal was that like I'll go for one semester so long as I register in a university in Jordan and I have a seat. Because my dad was like, well, if you go for one semester and you don't like it, at least you have a seat in a Jordanian university. So you're not like skipping or losing a year. And I was like, okay, deal.
Good compromise.
Yeah, done. I'll go register in Jordanian university. I'll register in a UK university. I'll do one semester. So it was like September until like December. So like, the winter, semester. And then I'll come back and then we'll discuss how it is. And I did. And then my dad was like, okay, are you coming back? And I was like, no, this is amazing. I'm not coming back.
Your freedom. Yeah. Okay.
So it was my dad basically saying, look, if I'm going to say yes to this, you're going to have to do engineering. But also it was a good choice because studying engineering also, introduced me to different ways of thinking that if I've done physics, for example, probably, I mean, you would never really know, but
You never
I think
know.
it was
Yeah,
a good
but
choice.
I guess it's interesting also because I studied in the UK. The challenge I find with the system there is that if you're not sure what you're doing, it's quite an immersive degree. You don't have many options to study around other subjects like in the US. So you must have liked that subject enough to actually enjoy the semester and continue, right?
Yeah. So interestingly, in semester one, so I did all the like, engineering, whatever courses and all of that. And then my electives were in the physics department.
Okay.
And then I went back to my dad like semester two. And I remember like calling him and actually like it's a very vivid memory because I was like walking around the city hall, like, in Birmingham. And I was like, I think I want to switch to physics. Like I like the electives more. And he was like, look, you said that you don't want to come back. Okay, I'm fine with that. But like the deal is still through and like if the deal continues then you have to do engineering and you're gonna have to do the full course. And I was like, all right, okay, fine.
Okay,
and
fine.
it's like you can't walk back from what you committed to. That's the deal.
Were your elder sisters actually were they allowed like did they go abroad for their
They
study?
did their masters, not their bachelors. But they took that choice as well. Like that was what they wanted to do. It was okay, fine, do it, but with conditions.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with your track record at that point.
Yeah, which actually probably like it worked out very well, and
Right,
I think it was
I
like the
agree.
good.
That's interesting. Okay, so then you graduate. I guess you need a work permit to work in the UK, I imagine. So what happened there? What happened next?
So I finished my degree and then I applied for jobs and I wanted to do like consulting, either Big Four or consulting companies. I got a job offer from Ernst & Young, their IT advisory service line. And I got so excited. And I remember actually the first person I called was like my dad. And then he was like, all right, so I guess you're not coming back then. I was like, no, I don't think so. So we had like every semester there's like a reflection, session that
moment.
we do.
Yeah.
Are you coming back or not? No. so, so yeah, I ended up doing like around 3 years in E&Y. And then I got so like sick of it, honestly, like working in a corporate environment. It was fun being in London. And then I called my dad and I was like, yeah, I think I'm coming back now.
Wow. I guess why consulting? Because I feel like I remember when I graduated, I just applied to all kinds of jobs. I still didn't know what I wanted. And I did computer science, which is, I wouldn't say it's the same as electrical engineering, but it's within the domain of like you can do pretty much
Yeah.
many options right in front of you. So what was it just consulting because everyone around you were doing consulting banking, or was it like you actually think that it's a good place to step into your career?
I didn't actually know. I was really young at that point. I was probably 20. I think when I went to the career center, like everyone who was like smart in my like course were applying for investment banking because there was like a lot of quant trading also that's been happening, and then they wanted like a lot of engineers to
Exactly.
apply for that, and then consulting because IT consulting was like a really big thing at that point. So I just kind of like I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I just like went with what like the smart people are doing, and then ended up just
Yeah.
doing that. Yeah.
And then then moving to Jordan must have been a big change.
Yeah.
How was that?
It was depressing. And I think like I realized that I don't like working, in the city in London. I like London, but I didn't want to continue living there. I realized like working in a corporate is not my thing. There were times where I just couldn't fit in like a corporate culture at all. And then I was like, well, I'll just leave my job and figure out what I want to do. And I knew that I don't want to work in a corporate environment. So I went back to Jordan and I didn't actually apply for jobs or work for like a full year, I think, like maybe like 10 months. And I remember every morning, like my dad would wake up and was like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm just gonna go like paint or like something like that. And he's like, we didn't send you to like study abroad, and you spent 3 years working in London to like sit and paint for 8 months. And like how Arab parents are
Your
like,
dad sounds like a character, by the way. I'd love to meet him. Anyway, yeah.
yeah, my mom was so sympathetic about it. She was like, oh no, but she was away for 7 years. I was
She
like,
loves
"Oh."
that you're there. She's just happy you're
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
exactly. But my dad was like, what the hell are you doing? It's like, go find a job.
Oh man, it's
So
hilarious.
yeah. And then well, I did like a couple of like volunteering stuff, and then I really didn't know what I wanted to do. Yeah, honestly. Like it was a bit depressing for me as well.
And is that when you went to Aramex? Is that when you started at Aramex, or was that?
Yeah, so I did like a couple of like volunteering stuff with Jordan River Foundation and things like that. And then I was like, okay, I need a real job. And then that's how I met actually one of the so she's a friend of a friend, Reem Khouri, who like we're still super close actually until now. She was working with Fadi on a number of things. So she was reporting to him directly, working on like from philanthropy to like investing in social entrepreneurs to like liaising with like I don't know
Yeah,
Wanda,
Fadi Ghandour,
RMX.
just to,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
to make
exactly.
sure.
Fadi Ghandour,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah, founder of RMX. And then she wanted to move to like a different job. She was actually starting her own social impact consulting company. I don't know, somehow my CV got on her desk and she was like, okay, that sounds like a cool person. We should meet. And then I met her and she was like, okay, so what do you want to do? And I was like, honestly, like, I don't want to work in a corporate environment. I don't want to work in a nonprofit. And I don't want to go like back to London. And I did have at that point an admission letter from LSE to do my master's because I was like, all right, I'm just gonna like apply for everything and figure out what my like chances are. And at that point, the admission letter was like for a September admission, and I think around that time it was like we were like summertime, so I needed to make a decision quickly. My dad was totally not like on board with the fact that I'd like go back to London because he was like, look, stay in the region. There's lots of stuff happening. You can go to Dubai. You can, stay in Amman. You can go to like Qatar. So a lot of people were like, going to the Gulf at that point. That was like in 2000, maybe 13 or 2012. And he was like, but stay in the region. There's lots of stuff happening, and you can find a job. And I met Reem, and then I was like, okay, that sounds like a cool job. It's like everything and nothing, right? And like you do like bits, here and there, and you work with like really interesting people. Working with Fadi, obviously, and Fadi is a great role model and all of that.
Yeah.
And she was like, okay, so here's the deal. Like, come join. will overlap by 6 months. I'll start like handing over certain projects for you, and then let me know what you're more comfortable handling. And then the other stuff, maybe like we can have other people like in RMX or Ruwad or, like the other nonprofits that was under Fadi, like for people to handle. And I was like, okay, cool. Let's give it a go. I think I'm always like, okay, let's give it a go. Let's go.
Yeah, you're still at that age though. You were at an age where you were experimenting.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
fair.
I was like, I don't know, 20, maybe 2, 20, like 3. Like I was still like young in the
Yeah,
sense
yeah,
like I'm
yeah.
not too worried about the fact that I'm trying new things. But at the same time, I got so bored like not doing like anything. And then I didn't really want to go do my master's. And then I deferred the entry for my master's because like I also met Fadi, and then Fadi was like, all right, okay, cool. Like literally, I think the interview was like maybe 10 minutes or less. He's like, can you do this? Da, 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 da. And I was like, yes. I was like, okay, come next week.
Amazing.
So yeah, it was fun. And then I deferred my
So I guess
LSE entry.
could
and
I
then,
could I
yeah.
could we just like I would imagine that Reem seems like a person in your life that really changed
Yeah.
your future. She seems like even how you describe her
Yeah.
and the choices that you made. So her and obviously Fadi with your first choice, well, not first choice, but with your transition to working in the region.
Yeah.
And then from there, I'd love it if you describe out like because I remember we met years ago when you were doing Yellow as a
Yeah.
payments processor, Bitcoin payments
I
processor.
think this is the first time we met.
Yeah, that was the first time we met.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think we were doing a product demo. You gave me like 0.1 Bitcoin at some
Oh,
point. So I'm
okay,
like,
cool.
now it's worth it.
I hope you
Like
kept it.
0.1, Anyway, besides the point, I'm curious. Yeah, so like the role sounds entrepreneurial, and that allowed you to just suddenly allow your curiosity guide you to crypto. How did you navigate to get to from Yellow to eventually what is BitOasis?
Yeah, I think working with Fadi, honestly, is really the environment more than anything else that like makes you. It's a different way of doing work, very entrepreneurial, but also like the fact that you're meeting different people doing interesting things start kind of opening up, like your eyes or like different kind of windows in your mind, right? To like kind of see things in a different perspective, and also as part of that job, like I had that kind of flexibility to also look into different things. Like I was doing my job, but at the same time, like figuring out what these guys are doing and, reading those, like, I don't know, like reports, working with the WAMDA team on like, bits and pieces and seeing what's interesting out there. And that was actually, like you said, like the beginning of the path, essentially.
Yeah.
So I got interested in Bitcoin around 2013 or 14. So it was like almost like 2 years working with, after working with Fadi. I was still working with Fadi full time at that point. It was like a really kind of random way how I got into Bitcoin. So I spent some time on like tech forums and like Reddit and stuff like that. And then someone had this post about like this anarchist, currency that is going to take over the world, and at that point the narrative was very like anarchist in that way, right? That's like anti-government, all of that. I don't think Bitcoin is necessarily that, but that narrative still exists to some extent, I would say. And I was like, whoa, okay, that's a crazy concept. What are these guys talking about? This sounds like a scam. But I kept kind of like, reading. And at that point, I think around 2014, there was like another price crash. But it was all like with those news, like the crash and the price, news was on like the mainstream media. So it almost kind of like pulled me back to start kind of reading more on Bitcoin as well. And then I read the white paper, and then I realized, oh, actually, there is an actual technical foundation. Like there is an actual technical innovation there. Like it's not what those crazy people on Reddit say it is. And then I think when I started kind of digging deeper into the fundamentals and like searching for people who are neutral, balanced, but talk about it from a technical, innovation perspective. So when I started kind of following those people more, on Twitter and some of those tech forums, that's when you start realizing, all right, actually, there's something more behind it. And then at that point, I think my thinking was, this is a crazy idea, right? Like, is there going to be like one currency on the internet that takes over the world? Well, maybe not, but it's a crazy idea still. It's a possibility. But then if that's like your like maximum, like let's say
Outcome.
craziest exactly outcome, but then like at the minimum, it's going to completely transform financial services. It's almost like a binary type of change. Like it's equally transformation. Like in my mind, like what it could be at a maximum level and what it could be at minimum level is equally insane.
Yeah.
So then I have to be part of this. Like it was that kind of thing that
Wow.
uh, it's really transformational in the sense that like if you go through all the scenarios of what it could be, it's crazy at all fronts. So I was like, okay, I want to be part of this. And then I remember like, okay, I want to be part of this. What I'm gonna do? I need to buy Bitcoin because now I read so much about it. I understand how it works, but I want to try it. Like, and I like I'm very kind of experimental in doing things. Like, I like the theory part, but like at what point I get tired of it and like I need to like start kind of doing things. And I couldn't find anyone to buy Bitcoin from, so that's how I got actually connected to David, who I started like YellowPay with at
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah,
point.
yeah.
Because one of my friends was like, "Oh, you want to buy Bitcoin? I've got a friend that is actually based in Toronto. He's into Bitcoin. So maybe I can connect you guys and he can sell you some Bitcoin." So I bought my first Bitcoin. It was like around $100 at that point from David. And he was like, "All right, take some Bitcoin. If you want to buy more, let me know." And then I started using it. I was like, whoa, okay, this thing actually works. And then I got so excited about it. We started a meetup group in Amman, a meetup group in Dubai. David moved back to the region. We started a meetup group in Beirut. And like people were just like so interested in it, especially in Amman, by the way. Like Amman Tech Tuesdays with Fuad
Yeah,
Jaris
yeah,
as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Lots of people came, and I think we had like around 90 people or something. And that was like back in 2014. So obviously the community is much, much, much bigger right now. At that point, David and I were like, okay, should we do something? Should we not do something? And I wasn't like fully full time on YellowPay at that point. I think I was really kind of almost like it's an opportunity for me to see what it looks like if we build a product and like understand kind of like the technicalities of the mechanics behind it. But I wasn't like 100% sold on the idea that we should do a B2B product before the B2C product, because when I got into Bitcoin, for me as an individual, the first need was like, I want to buy Bitcoin. My first need wasn't like, I want to pay on Amazon using like, so that
Yeah.
becomes afterwards. So anyway, like we started like YellowPay, but then I wasn't like kind of fully full time on it. I was still super keen on the idea of doing a B2C product versus B2B. And then through other meetup groups, I met like some of my existing co-founders. And then, kind of BitOasis got launched. But that's like a whole different story of how BitOasis
Yeah, I
started.
want to hear. I want to hear it because I know. Look, I know the journey has been a like roller coaster. To be honest with
Yeah,
you,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
especially with the volatility of Bitcoin itself, but let alone the fact that it's such a heavily contested, let's say, solution, and governments are still coming to terms with it. Um, but yeah, tell us.
So we did a Bitcoin event. I can't remember, it was like maybe 2015 at that point or something of that sort, maybe late 2014. And then I met someone who knows. So we're three co-founders. So it's myself, Daniel, my CTO, and then third co-founder is Tarek. He actually sits on the board. So he was like our first, I would say, kind of more like founding angel investor versus like an operating, kind of full time,
Hmm.
founder. But at that point, actually, what we've all agreed on is like we'll all come, full time at like different times before we raise. At that point, Tarek and Daniel met in San Francisco. So like Tarek is based in the US. Daniel at that point was actually based in San Francisco as well. And they started kind of like toying with the idea of like building a wallet, like a consumer product. But they didn't know particularly where it should be launched and how it should look like and all of that. And then I met Tarek. And then, Tarek is originally Middle Eastern, so he's Jordanian, like I'm Jordanian. And then I met with them and I was like, "Oh, what are you guys are doing?" And they're like, "Okay, so we have this like super like MVP, of a wallet. We're trying to kind of figure out what to do with it and all of that." And I was like, guys, this sounds like pretty cool. I was part of a startup that, we were doing like B2B, and I didn't think that was like a great, thing. Here's what we can do. How about we like bring this to the Middle East? We all partner up together and then we start, like BitOasis, or we'll have BitOasis. But it's not a wallet, it has to be an exchange. And we're gonna build an exchange, build that infrastructure, people can buy and sell, like bring crypto to the Middle East, essentially. And they're like, okay, cool idea. We'll all partner up together. It actually really took us like probably 6 months back and forth, like figuring out how it should look like, what are we going to do, who's going to do what. To some extent that was clear, but it took us some time to kind of get into that, like, okay, can we work together or not? And then we're like, okay, cool, let's do it. And then we launched the wallet. Obviously, we've realized that what people want is not a wallet. They want to buy and sell, and they want to like trade and all of the stuff they're doing right now. And I remember like figuring out like with our lawyer, how can we do it? How can it be done in a way where like you're not kind of stepping on the wrong side of the the regulation. There wasn't much of a regulation at that point on like crypto assets. So we found a way where essentially, you're not like a depository business in some sense where like, you're financially regulated, but we still thought of ourselves as a financial services company because eventually we will be regulated as such, which is the licenses that we just got right now
Yeah.
in terms of financial permissions. So
Amazing.
yeah, it's like
Years later, it's
yeah,
like
yeah,
amazing.
exactly. But all throughout that journey, we were like liaising closely with, the regulators, understanding what their concerns are. We were doing like KYC, AML, like, controls internally from day one. So like the risks were mitigated in the way that regulators will expect us to do it. And I think that what provides them a lot of comfort to still allow BitOasis to, kind of grow and all of that.
Yeah, but there were moments I know that were like scary ones, or like, let's say they call it valleys of death, but like you were like had to cross some of those things, right?
Yeah, I think every startup does, like in the first couple of years. And I think with us, all right,
Every startup does, but you're going in a
even more
sector that's even more.
contentious.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. It's definitely, yeah, 100%. So it's like, it's that, but then times three or
Yeah,
like times, I don't
exactly.
know, 10 maybe. One thing that we were like maybe talking about, just before, doing the podcast, and I think we've probably discussed it in like some of the like other meetings before.
Yeah.
Like as a sole founder, that was very, very tough. But I think honestly, like there's a big part in terms of like, myself as a founder in this case, but like founders, like they are the ones that kind of make things happen at the end of the day. Because you can easily, the reasonable decision is to pack up your stuff and say, okay, we've tried, great, let's move on. That's actually in almost every case where the startup is going through like a valley of like death or whatever. The really reasonable thing is to just like pack up and go, right? Because like, why are you putting yourself in this situation? Yeah, but it's almost like, that's why it's a cliche, I know, but I actually really fully believe in it. Like founders are not reasonable. It's true. They're actually not reasonable. And to some extent, it works very well in those situations where there's adversity. But in situations where there is like, kind of fluffy expectations and all of that, like that same trait of being unreasonable, like it's also in that situation as well. Like
you're delusional, like
delusional
expectations,
like you're
or
delusional
ambition.
in both scenarios.
Exactly.
Basically. But that like trait works very well in adversity. But I think that's what makes founders resilient, and they persevere, and that's what makes companies successful. So I think
that's what makes the best founders go through
being
this,
delusional. I think I know it's very how to say it, like what I'm saying, like probably it's not the mainstream and controversial, but it's actually you being delusional is what makes a startup. Like the more not like we work Adam type of delusion.
Yeah, exactly.
But you still have to be self-aware. So I think if you couple self-awareness
but
with
like Elon Musk, SpaceX and Tesla and all these things, I mean, he had to think really like outside, like nobody will ever comprehend that level of delusion, let's say, if you want to use the word there. But
exactly. Someone maybe needs to kind of coin that term in the context of a founder, because it's like delusion has like also a bad rap.
Yeah, it's not about the negative side of it.
Yeah, but it's
okay, so you had to go.
That.
Yeah, you had to go through, and you were solo. Well, you said you had founders, but I mean, you essentially are effectively a solo founder in the journey, right? So you had to kind of navigate those things by yourself to a certain extent. And I know
I think we also had a great team. I really have to say, like we have really strong team members that also, to some extent, have very similar traits that I have. It's like scrappy, persevere, resilient, resourceful in the sense how you approach problems. And I don't know if it's like a product of me being as a founder like that they ultimately that became like a company trait that we have. But also I feel like people who are alike end up working together and they click in a work environment. So I'm also thankful of the fact that like within our like management team, because now we've got actually a management team, so it's like a lot more standardized. There are like people who are experienced, but also like scrappy in that sense.
So it's culture that you've built.
A culture. That
I guess, one of the things that investors, I guess I'd love to bring up the subject of investors at some point, but like one of the things that I think is interesting is timing, right? So you were early.
Yeah, we were.
If you think about it today, you're really early, right?
Yeah,
so
we were.
So it's also a bit on the delusional side, right? Where you have to go, you have to, you have to persevere until the timing is right. And I think, investors have to actually buy into the story also on timing. So that journey, love you to describe it out, like how it was, because you do have some pretty interesting investors outside of the region in your cap table. You had to be super resourceful, I'm sure, to manage to navigate. I think at some point, if you don't mind me saying, like you were profitable, that you allowed that allowed you to continue to sustain yourself. The question is more around like when you went about the fundraising side, like how was that experience for you? Because it's been years, right? And now it seems
Yeah.
to be a bit. You can see through the clouds. You can see, light at the end of the tunnel, kind of thing.
At the point where we've realized that we're early, it's almost like I had to flip our operating model to optimize for profitability until we get to a chance where it is the right timing and then do like kind of big fundraise, which is almost kind of like where we are right now. Yeah, the
And that was
environment.
that was a function of you not finding that access to too much capital. So you had to say, okay, there's not enough funding available for this space. I need to figure out how to be profitable, or I need to optimize for that.
Yeah, it was different things. So it was a situation of bear market, right?
Mhm.
Because like crypto goes into those cycles, right?
Yeah.
We're like extended, like crypto winter, and then like 2 quarters of like craziness, which is kind of what we're in right now.
Yeah.
The different things that I realized, yes, we're early, but being early, if you can survive in that period, becomes an advantage
Yeah.
because you've learned a lot. You have a solid platform. You've invested in like your team, your technology, and actually to some extent we have that compared to some of the people that are just like kind of starting out right now, but only if you can survive long enough, right? When we got to a point where like, all right, let's do another fundraiser. That's like around the bear market, maybe 2019, etc. It's just like people were not excited. Like with crypto, the narrative is very important because it's not like e-commerce where there's always demand. Like it's not that kind of like more mainstream where a lot of investors get what you do. It's almost like, you have few investors that understand that space very well, not even just in the region. I think like internationally for the longest time. Now, obviously, you see a lot more people obviously getting into the space, like internationally and all of that. But at that point, it was a function of, okay, we're early, it's a bear market. And then we were always at the cross section of, crypto, which is niche, and then Middle East, which is, for international investors.
Yeah.
When you put this combination together, you're like, what?
That's so true. That's so true.
Like crypto in the Middle East. So now it's a different story because like the numbers are different, we're different. Like I think there's excitement around.
But
the
you got
space, which I
funding
love.
before 2019
Yeah,
from
yeah, we did.
international
Yeah, we
guys.
did from international. Yeah, like really great names like Pantera Capital Digital Currency Group. Their LPs are Benchmark, Fortress, Capital. Like so like great investors. And by the way, they came early and they're continuing to be happy to back us. It's almost like for them, they know the crypto story. It's a long-term play. Obviously they've diversified and invested in like so many other regions and all of that, but they're still happy to continue backing us. And until now, one of them is actually on the board as well, Pantera Capital. They always add value and they understand the adoption cycle in general when it comes to crypto. So I think if you're a founder who's building in a niche market, in an emerging market as well, like geographically, like you really need to have investors that strongly buy into the story, but then long-term investors, which is sometimes a bit hard to find in the VC, space.
It's totally hard to find. Everyone
Yeah,
wants to see
hard.
hockey
Yeah.
stick growth from the get-go.
Yeah.
There's not much patient capital.
But in crypto, by the way, it's always like, they call it, it's funny. I think people in crypto are like one of a kind because they go through like, those winters and like summers. And there's this term that people call like diamond hands in the sense like, you're buying Bitcoin, but you're never selling it when like you go into a bear market because you know that you're going to like reap the rewards at some point when like there's a bull market. And I think like investors in the space follow the same, logic is like, this is a long-term play. Okay, like we're still early in the adoption cycle. BitOasis will have its time, which kind of what we're in right now. But back in let's say 2017, when they've like invested, it's like, okay, we invest in infrastructure. We think she's gonna get to a point she'd survive to once she gets into that stage, and we think we're backing the right founder. And I think it's a very different way of operating to, like, for example, if you're running Kareem, or if you're running e-commerce, where like the demand is there
Yeah.
and you're in a mature market and you're like, I don't know, like competing, like the dynamics is very different.
Yeah.
Right now we're seeing more competition obviously coming into the market and all of that. So I think the operating model will change eventually. But I think having that agility is almost like mental plasticity, right? Like as a founder is like, okay, so now we're in this or like part of the market cycle. You change to a different operating model. Now we're in a stage where there's like, you know, the narrative, the hype, the da, da, da. You change your operating model accordingly. So that's something I had to learn actually. It
That's
wasn't,
interesting.
yeah, it wasn't like super easy, but I had to learn it. Yeah.
Yeah, but what I appreciate is like to your point, like, you know, if you take long-term views, you're really backing the long-term potential. If you're too focused on the transaction, the short-term gains, as an investor, you're gonna miss these opportunities because they're gonna come, and I think more often than not. But you had obviously Fadi come in, which
Yeah.
is an amazing transition from working there to like getting funded by him. I know he's a big fan. So,
Yeah.
and Faris, I think, is also very,
Yeah.
very much into Bitcoin and crypto.
Yeah.
When you think about the whole fundraising, just a side topic, but like in terms of your learnings in the process and what you would do, not differently, but maybe like what you look for, you know, from an investor and these type of things. Like, what do you think you've learned, or what do you think advice do you have for the founder now, let's say going out to raise?
Yeah, many things. It's
I love
almost
it.
like you need a different episode altogether for
Yeah, I
that.
know, I know.
I think your choice of founder, your choice of investors also depend on your industry. So
Yeah,
I think understanding your industry and who's like really in it and believes in your story and your market and your product, like this is very very important
yeah,
because you want people to back you, but then you want people to also believe in what you do. It sounds cliche, but it's actually very important. For fundraising and having someone on your cap table and have someone kind of back you, especially if they have a board seat and you know someone that you're working with in that way, it's a form of partnership.
yeah,
Whatever that form of partnership is, if you have someone who doesn't kind of believe, you know, in it, they're not going to be invested in it. Like they're just like probably okay, they'll give you some money, give it cash, but then you know, you probably can raise that cash from someone else. Like you can really maximize the value you get from, you know, that partner if you have someone who really believes, you know, in you. It's almost kind of back to the leverage,
yeah. I
you
was
know,
about to
right?
say, yeah, it's exactly the
Leverage
leverage
point. It
question.
really changes things. Now is that's like easy to say, but I guess, you know, founders would probably have the question is like, but then how do you do that? Invest in relationships early. I think one advice that investors say that like founders have to take very seriously is like you really need to invest in relationships before you fundraise. Not because, okay, so from an investor standpoint, obviously they want to see progress. But from a founder perspective, you want to understand your investor. Why are they investing? Do they believe in you? Do you think they're going to help you? So that's why it's like, you know, investors are looking for one thing, but you're also as a founder assessing them on a different scale. Like, you know, is that the right partner? You know, et cetera, et cetera. So investing in relationships are definitely important. Someone that believes in you, someone that believes in your business. Um, it's very important also to have that click.
Chemistry.
Yeah. Because if you don't, you know, if it's a great name, right? But you don't get along with that person who's gonna, I don't know, sit on your board or give you that check. And let's say someone who's like you're gonna work closely with. It's not someone kind of writing you a small check or something like that. If you don't get along with them, you're gonna clash. And as a founder, you don't have time for these things. Like you have to focus on your business.
Especially because it's years.
Yeah,
You're
it's
gonna be with
years.
them for years.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I guess now that you have your regulation, which I know took time, and I know I know that at some point, let's say on the banking side, right, you had some banks like literally close the door at some point in your journey, right? How did you navigate that? I'm actually curious before we go there.
I don't
Because
even know.
yeah, because that's like that I have so much. So I here's the thing, like I have so much respect for you. I don't want to make this, don't want to promote you too much because it's not that's not part of the
Thanks.
concept. But I want to say like it's like I just remember meeting you on several occasions. There is a side to this that's kind of ugly where people want to see others fail, right? They're like against these people who are trying to change, you know, the world or the region. And I think persistence is one thing, but the fact that you were like literally had people like closing bank accounts or making your life like inoperable and you still operated and you still went through it. Like for me, that indicator is just like is so rare. Like it's like the delusion, right? Like the banks shut you down and you're still like continuing, So I just want to highlight that because I feel like it's so undersold, like that part of your journey. And maybe I want to talk about it if you don't mind just sharing, like, or at least what emotionally or team culture when they see this happening, like, how do you navigate that?
Yeah.
Like, what do you do?
It almost kind of got to a point where, like, if someone shuts the door, it's like, it's a challenge. Like, no, 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 no. You're shutting the door. We're gonna keep going.
Mm.
It's like, really, it's almost like they take joy from
Yeah,
it.
you're ready to go. It's like fight or flight. I'm ready to fight.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah, yeah,
go.
yeah. Like literally, we have fighters on the team. It almost gets to a point where, like, guys, like seriously, please, like, like tone it down. Like, this is a real problem, right? And they're like, no, 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 we can do this, and like immediately they go into problem solving, mode. And I think part of it is probably because I do that as well.
Yeah.
It almost gets to a point where I think they're delusional. When you get
This
to
is
a
definitely,
stage
we're
where
using
it's
delusional a lot today. So
exactly. But I think ultimately what happened was like it became a culture thing. It's important for startups to have that because you want to make sure you're resourceful and your team is resourceful and you can't be solving all problems, right? It really got to a stage where like, okay, like you're
yeah, but
firefighting all fronts.
like there could be a case where I'm like sitting and I'm like, oh my god, the bank shut us down. I need to look for another job, right?
No.
Like that. So you're saying so that's so interesting because the culture you ingrained kind of stems from your upbringing, which we talked about, like that whole rebellious side, which is really cool that it stems now. Like if you look at your firm, it's like you've kind of ingrained that sort of in the fabric of the company,
Yeah.
which is a competitive advantage.
Yeah, no,
That's what you're
now
saying.
we like, I mean, for us it's like, no, we're gonna continue. It's like, BitOasis is here to stay. Like,
Yeah.
it is delusional. If you ask me.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So okay, so now the delusion's over. You have the license in your hand, right? Like when you look at like the future, what do you think is what inspires you? What are you motivated by? What's like maybe a little bit about that on the firm side before we go into the personal one? Like what are you driven now by?
I mean, there are different things. Just actually one point on like
Yeah.
what made you persevere. There are times where actually it was the team. It was just like seeing the team how like they're persistently wanting to. There were times where like, oh my god, what are we doing? Like honestly, like I'll just sit down on my own and like, what are we doing? And then I come to the office and like people coming up with solutions and telling me what to do, and it's hard to stop
Yeah.
when you have a team telling you you need to keep going. And those are like the lows, right? And then there are times where like I do that pushing. It's like, no, guys, we need like more solutions. Like, you need to think harder and stuff like that. But then the main point is the customer demand, like the user demand. Like people want this.
Mm.
And it's almost always the thing that like, guys, what we do makes sense, right? It makes sense, but let's find a way where we can do it where we continue until things get in the right place, which is like, the licensing and some of the stuff that we're doing right now. I think like crypto is here to stay. And I think it would really change, banking, financial services, payments. I'm more kind of big on that idea. I know there's like lots of other innovation happening, in real estate, tokenizing, assets and all of that. And I think ultimately we'll get to that stage. But it's really the fintech or the financial services part of things that I'm like excited about. And, obviously for us, we want to be like the biggest in the region, but I would say even outside of Arab speaking countries. So, we're really looking at Turkey, we're looking at Pakistan. I think Asia is definitely interesting versus like, Europe or the US and any of that. And this industry is so early that like, you being an exchange is great for now, but you're not going to continue being an exchange. Like in a couple of years from the infrastructure, you're going to go into the application layer, right? You're going to start kind of focusing on verticals that are important for customer adoption. And that's, I think, where it gets interesting, where it's almost you create like a fintech super app. And it's also a cliche like word, but cliche words are actually important because it delivers, the idea directly. But it's almost like you have your BitOasis app. And then from there, you can invest in crypto. You can invest in, tokenized securities or whatever that like that is going to evolve into the space. You can do payments. It's almost like your mini bank account, but it's all kind of powered, by crypto. And I think that's very, for me, that's definitely kind of how I see BitOasis is like really evolving from an exchange into like an app that people use on daily basis. We ultimately can't like be ahead of how the market is evolving. You evolve with the market. One thing, by the way, I've learned is the strongest factor to your success is not your investors. It's not, well, okay, your investors, your team, and all of that plays a big part. It's the market. Like the market decides whether you're gonna win or lose. The market decides at what point you're gonna roll out this product. The market decides whether your technology is mature or not. It's almost like I feel like, we have different stakeholders, and then in my mind, I created that stakeholder. It's almost like I painted a picture of that person and how they look like. It's called the market. And it's almost like I always kind of have a conversation. Okay, so what does the market think? And that's why I think it's really the biggest deciding factor of when to roll a product, when to evolve as a company, when all of that. Ultimately, we evolve with the space and the consumer adoption and what the market votes as ready. And for me, that's like my North Star. But ultimately, how this industry is moving will definitely be growing from an exchange into like the application part of things, where essentially people are using crypto, whether they know it's crypto or not. That's like a different story in terms of how the applications are built. But I really do think that like it'll really transform, how we work with like financial service applications or like in our relationship with money and banks.
Yeah, that's I mean, it sounds like you're literally are scratching the surface right now. So the potential is huge. I don't want to go too much into it, but I saw a tweet on Coinbase and how Coinbase could be the biggest bank eventually because it has a lot of people's net worth right now tied to crypto sitting there in accounts, and now they can issue cards and do other things that can suddenly allow them to become a fintech play that's beyond just an exchange, which I see like this whole super app concept. So maybe like we'll end it with a couple of things. Like if you had to, are there any books that you're like, okay, I think this is a book that really helped me through shaping whatever I'm doing, or yeah, maybe with that.
There are many books. The one that comes to mind that I read quite recently, I think it wasn't the last one that I read, but a couple of months back. It's the one for the founder of Netflix. It's called the No Rule Rule. So it's about the culture of Netflix and how like they created this environment because like there isn't like set rules. Like people ultimately fall back to operate in a way that is productive. They seek like obviously the best for the company and like themselves. It almost reminded me of how like my parents actually raised us, where there were very minimal rules. Like there were guiding rules, and then everything else was you just figure it out within those frameworks. So the No Rule Rule for the founder of Netflix is good. I think that's like the one that I remember lately that I read. There are a couple of others.
No, let's stick with that. With that. I do like that. I'm actually going to pick it up after this episode. But then, when you think about like, let's say legacy or purpose now on a personal level, and you think like, okay, this is what I love about founders. Even for me, it's like, you're on a mission to really impact people's lives. Do you ever think about that? Like, or is it more like your head down? What do you think about purpose? What do you think about legacy and meaning like that?
Very good question. I think it's work in progress. It's a tricky one because it also changes with the maturity of you as a person. And I feel like often you start companies because you're excited about a technology, you're excited about a specific market need. For me, it really started as a excitement about this technology and space, almost like as an enthusiast. I never started a company or wanted to become a founder. I mean, even at this stage, I can say, okay, the social impact and impacting people's lives, but it's hard to think about that when you start a company because you're still like in, like the piping part where like, the product and all of that. But ultimately, for me, impact comes from scale. Impact obviously comes from putting out a product that improves people's lives. And then there's multiple ways, obviously, how you can drive impact. But in my mind, impact is a great product plus scale, right? And that's something I continuously kind of think about obviously in light of what we do in terms of crypto, and then how does that look like, especially in the region that we're in versus like in the US and other markets. And I really have to say it's work in progress. But for me, in terms of legacy, because I've worked in different fields, and I think ultimately what I wanted to also do is what is like the best environment for me to have that, to drive that impact, and like almost kind of like do something that I really enjoy, but at the same time impact people around me and have that legacy. I don't know exactly what that legacy is and will be. It always changes.
Yeah.
But for me, one thing that I know for sure, at that point, because I'm like in my early 30s, at least I've decided the environment and the setting is really like building products, businesses, working with like smart people, building teams. How it looks like legacy, I don't know, 5 or 10 years from now is a bit hard to say, but I think that's the medium at least.
No, I love that. I love that. That's a great way to end this thing. But look, I had a blast. I mean, a lot of laughs. I really enjoyed learning about your journey, Ola.
Thank you. Thanks, Amir.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you were able to take away some valuable insights on this episode. Subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast listening app, and please don't forget to leave us a review and share it with your friends. The Middle East has a new story to tell, and this is From MENA to the World.